Okay, everyone, we're going to start our conversation about sociological theory by trying to get our heads wrapped around what exactly we mean by sociological theory. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk us through what it is that sociologists mean when we talk about sociological theory. Now, if you sort of step back from this course and think broadly about what it means to do social science, what it means to do sociology, there's really two basic elements that are underneath this. One you're going to get in your social research methods class, and one you're going to get here in sociological theory. So the first part has to do with how we analyze and interpret empirical data, or how we analyze and understand and collect empirical data. Right, so that's the first part of social science. But what we're going to do here in this class is to think through how to develop theories that explain those empirical data that we see in the real world. Now, there's an important dynamic that happens between empirics and theory, and you'll actually see that through all of the theorists that we talk about. You can especially see this in Marx, where he starts with some abstract idea about capitalism and then goes into seeing how it can play out in his contemporary context, and then works back up to think about how to theorize what he's seen on the ground. Right? And that's the kind of dynamic interplay between empirics and theory that really good sociology is all about. So let's talk then about what sociological theory actually is. You can boil the whole concept of sociological theory down to this simple statement. Theory is one possible answer to an empirical question about the social world. It's one possible answer to some question we have about social phenomena. So when you're thinking about how to do that, what we're really talking about is a kind of two-step process. Step one, let's figure out and find some empirical pattern out there in the real world. You can think about thousands of different empirical patterns that could plausibly exist. Income inequality has been growing since the 1980s, right? That's an empirical pattern that we could then say, okay, how can we explain that phenomenon, right? Crime rates have been declining. Violent crime rates have been declining since the 1990s. How can we explain that phenomenon? Around the world right now, various kinds of authoritarian political regimes are gaining traction within a variety of countries across the world. What can explain the shift from a democratic to an authoritarian regime? What can explain the shift from an authoritarian regime to a democratic regime? Right? All of those are based upon looking at empirical patterns that exist in the world and then doing the second step, which is to explain why this thing exists. Right? And so I kind of blurred those a bit together. What does income inequality look like in the world? That's an empirical pattern. How can we explain why it's been growing since the 1980s? Well, that's a theoretical, or we could develop theoretical answers to that question. That's what theory is all about. So theory is an explanation to some empirical pattern that we see out in the world. Now, a more formal definition that you'll need to know and understand is that you can think about theory as a set of interrelated concepts that link together in specific relationships to help us explain some phenomena. This often takes a kind of causal form of X leads to Y, or let's say deindustrialization leads to growing income inequality. That could be an explanation for that phenomenon we noted earlier a few minutes ago, right? But that's sort of a way of saying, okay, this particular concept links to this particular outcome. So when we're doing a kind of formal theorizing, we're just linking together concepts to try and explain and offer some possible answer to a question about social phenomena. Now, what I'd like for you to think about, what I'd like for you to see here is that in thinking about theory this way, that we can develop a kind of structure for evaluating how good a theory is at explaining some phenomena. Now, you should think about this as a set of three interrelated questions that you can use whenever you're reading any of the theorists that we're going to talk about this entire semester. You can use this as a structure for evaluating how good some explanation is in some of your other classes that you're taking. And I hope that you can take this set of tools with you and use that to sort of evaluate how good a theory or a proposed theory is at explaining all of the phenomena that you're going to encounter in your daily lives going forward. So the first thing to do is to figure out, well, what is this theorist trying to explain? What is the person trying to communicate? What is the core empirical pattern that they're trying to figure out and develop an explanation to? Right? Are they trying to explain to us growing income inequality? They're trying to explain to us declining crime rates? Are they trying to do a more generic thing of explain why it is that some people engage in criminal behaviors and others do not? What specifically is that phenomena that they're trying to explain? You'll see that in this class, actually all of the theorists that we're talking about are trying to explain and understand this phenomena of modernity. A critical break we'll talk about in a subsequent lecture, but a critical break in the way that the social world was organized, that they're trying to figure out, why did this happen? When did this happen? What does it represent? What does it look like? And that's going to take actually different forms for all of these theorists. So for Durkheim, this is going to be a question about social cooperation and social solidarity. How does social solidarity happen in the modern individualized world? For Marx, this is going to be about, why did capitalism, a new set of economic relationships come, or a new set of social relationships come to govern our economic lives, and what does that mean in our modern world? And for Weber, this is about rationalization. Why did the modern world come to be rationalized, come to be organized through a particular set of principles that are oriented towards efficiency and calculability and predictability? So what is the theorist trying to explain? Now, what is their argument for explaining those relationships? That is, how do they put together a set of concepts that can then explain for us how this outcome comes about? Right? And so you really want to nail down and to figure out, what are those mechanisms that link X to Y? What are those mechanisms that link one phenomenon to explaining another phenomenon? Right? What links a change in the economic organization that we can call deindustrialization to growing income inequality? Right? That would just be one possible explanation for explaining that. So what are the kind of causal relationships between different variables or different concepts that can explain why some phenomena exists as it does? And then finally, what do we think about that? How good is this theory at explaining the thing we're trying to figure out and trying to explain? Does it capture all of the relevant elements? What elements might be missing? What key concept is not there that you think should be there that would help us better understand and explain this phenomenon? Are we thinking about the concept in the right way? You'll see that our theorists have different ways of thinking about the same concept. One of the most famous in sociology examples of this is the way that Marx and Weber think about social class, that leads to radically different understandings both of what class is and what it does in our modern world. Right? And are we analyzing concepts in the right way? Right? You'll see, for example, that Durkheim and Weber have very different methods for going about understanding and analyzing how these causal relationships play out. Okay, so I hope that this gives you a way, a kind of framework for thinking about what sociological theory is and how you can go about evaluating what you think of these theorists as we go along in the course. As always, let me know when you have questions, and otherwise I will see you later.